Okay, so like always, when I first come on, I'm just going to check to make sure that the audio is all working fine and stuff like that. So, there we go. So, sounds good on this end. Okay, so like always, when I first come on, I'm just... Yep, all right, that's good. All right. So, welcome to Fellowship of Christian Goths, Revealing the Darkness, our Bible study kind of a series. So, Josh, of course, is still out grieving over the loss of his father. But I wanted to kind of continue off from where we left off with our previous video. So our previous video was on the, at the time, holiday that just happened, Tisha B'Av. And a few days after Tisha B'Av is another, because Tisha B'Av is the 9th of Av. That's literally what that means. A few days later is Tu B'Av, which Tu B'Av is the 15th of Av. And they're somewhat related holidays, though exactly opposite on the holiday spectrum. So, Tisha B'Av, as you'll remember if you just got done watching that video, is a immensely sad commemoration. And both of these days are commemorations. Neither of them are Moedim. Neither of them are amongst the holidays that are commanded by the Almighty in the Torah. So these aren't really holidays, if you will. They're memorials. They're commemorations. So Tish B'Av, as you know if you watched the previous video, is the memorial of the day that the Israelites were told to enter into the Holy Land, but they did not because they got worried by the report from the scouts that the Israelites had sent out to scout out the land. They lost their faith, even though God said that He was with them, and that when He was with them, that then none of the Canaanites would conquer them. They got scared, they lost their faith, and because of that, the entire generation, 20 and up, were told that they had to die in the wilderness, that they could not enter into the promised land that they left Egypt for. It also, Tisha B'Av, commemorates the destruction of both temples, the first temple and the second temple, and the exiles that resulted from those, as well as any other sad, horrendous date in Jewish history, is also commemorated on Tisha B'Av. So that's the 9th of Av. So on the 15th of Av, a few days later, is Tu B'Av, which is what this video is about. And Tu B'Av, likewise, commemorates many events as well. The big connecting event, though, is initially Tu B'Av. What it commemorates is the day that the Israelites were finally told, okay, all the ones that were going to die in the wilderness have died, and now you can enter into the promised land. And interesting enough, there's a bit of a because we are Goths after all. There is a bit of a dark and really cool and kind of Gothic story surrounding this, and here's what it is. So, and now this is not in the Bible. This is part of oral tradition, but the oral tradition says that after the initial Tisha B'Av, after the first Tisha B'Av, every single year for those 40 years in the wilderness, on Tisha B'Av, the Israelites would dig graves into the ground, shallow graves, and they would sleep in their graves that night. And that night, a plague would come across their people and would kill a certain number of them. So in the morning, when they woke up, some of them would be dead, right? And then the survivors would then get up out of their graves, and they would go and they would, put dirt over the graves of those who had died, and then, they'd move on, right? So on the 40th year in the wilderness of sin, they did, as they always do for Tisha B'Av, and they dug graves, and they all laid into the graves. And then, the next morning, no one was dead. So they thought, maybe we got the date wrong. So they slept in the grave again. And then the next night, again. And then again. Until, on Tu B'Av, they saw the full moon. Because, remember, it's a lunar calendar. And so the 15th of the month, it's always the first moon. So it's always a full moon. So they saw a full moon, and they were like, well then, it's clearly passed. None of us died. It's great. We can enter the land. And the Almighty said, enter the land. And then they entered the land. And so this day is commemorated with great joy for God's loving kindness and God's mercy and loving kindness are the same word in Hebrew. It's chesed. It's his chesed, his loving kindness, his mercy, right? His saving mercy, his saving loving kindness. God's saving and redemptive mercy. He saved the people. He redeemed the people. He had forgiven them of their sins, right? And he has mercy on them, allowed them to live, and redeemed them, and delivered them to the promised land. Now, of course, I say all that from a Jewish perspective. From a Christian perspective, I hope everyone can see the deep importance of that. God's saving, redemptive grace. Because, grace and favor are the same word in Hebrew, right? So when he shows favor upon us, when he shows grace upon us, and mercy, loving kindness, and redeems us, forgives us our sins, and redeems us. Obviously, the Christian mindset connection should see those themes and understand their importance, right? So that is the initial thing that it commemorates. But also there's a few other things which it commemorates on top of that as well. And I'm going to pull up my notes. I'm choosing not to show you guys my notes today because the document that I have prepared for this, I'm nowhere near done editing. It's really not in a presentable state, so you don't need to see my document that I'm reading off of here. In the same way, I might, look like I'm looking through the text because I am, right? So, I'll go down, try and find one that gives it to me a little bit more concise than one. There we go. So, I'll read through the different things that it commemorates. The first one, of course, is going to be exactly what I've already just said to you, but after that, So anyway, so it says, various reasons for celebrating Tu B'Av are cited by the Talmud and Talmudic commentators. Number one, while the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, female orphans without brothers could... Oh, this is a different one than what I said. And, well, the one that I said looks like it's the second one that's listed here. All right, well, I'll read them then. While the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, female orphans without brothers could only marry within their tribe to prevent their father's inherited territory prevent their father's inherited territory in the land of Israel from passing on to other tribes. Following the incident of the daughters of Zelophehad, which, if you've been listening to the Torah portions, that was something like 4 weeks ago. After the conquest and division of Canaan under Joshua, This ban was lifted on the 15th of Av, on Tu B'Av, and intertribal marriage was allowed. So, for those who've been keeping up with the Torah Parashah, you know that about a month ago, we read, the incidents about the daughters of Zelophehad, where he had only daughters, no sons, and he had died. And Moses was divvying out, what tribes would get what. And they said, wait a minute here. Our father had only daughters. This is not fair, because that means that whenever we get married, that the property of that would belong to, that would be allotted to our father would go to others, our tribes, and our father would have no lasting name, no lasting memory in Israel. So Moses said, I'll speak with God, and you're right. So instead, you can only marry members of your own tribe. Children that were the sons, because these are all girls, of course, they could only marry sons of his brother's brothers, right? So that's what that meant. So, but what this is saying is after all of Canaan was conquered by the Israelites, that then apparently enough of a generation had passed that this was no longer a concern, so the descendants of Zelophehad could now intermarry with our tribes. So next one. At the end of Israel's wandering in the wilderness, the last remnant of the generation of the sin of the spies, or of the, I used a better word a moment ago. Spies is the common word, but when I retold the story a minute ago, I gave a better term. Not really spies. They were sent to spy out the land, right? So, but which had the last remnant of the generation of the sin of the spies, which had been forbidden from entering the promised land, found that they were not destined to die. For 40 years, every Tisha B'Av, the Israelites made graves for themselves, in which they slept, expecting to be their last night. Every year, a proportion of them died. In the 40th year, the 15,000 who had remained from the first generation went to sleep in the grave and woke up the next day to their surprise. Thinking they made a mistake with the date, they kept sleeping in graves until they reached Tu B'Av and saw a full moon. Only then did they know they were going to enter the land of Israel with the new generation. So, of course, that's why I told you, because obviously that happened before they entered into the promised land, whereas the other things with the daughters of Zelophehad, with them being allowed to intermarry, that happened afterwards. So, obviously, the one about them dying in the wilderness and then not dying, that would be the initial one. So then the next one listed is the tribe of Benjamin, was allowed to intermarry with other tribes after the incident of the concubine of Gibeah. See Judges chapters 19 through 21. So, to summarize that for you guys. So, after the kingdom apparently not kingdom yet, apparently it was during the time of the judges, but after the nation of Israel was established, with the judges as their leaders, there was an incident with a concubine and with the descendants of Benjamin. And there was a decree given that none of the other tribes would marry any of the Benjaminites. And due to that, for a while, after a few generations, the Benjaminites nearly got wiped out. They nearly went extinct. But of course, that wasn't meant to be, because the tribes are supposed to live on all the way even into the end times. And so then it mentioned, as it said in Judges chapter 19, 21, that there was this ban on marrying them, but eventually on Tu B'Av, the ban was lifted, and they were allowed to intermarry The sons of Benjamin were allowed to marry the daughters from other tribes, and therefore the tribe of Benjamin was saved on Tu B'Av. Then another reason would be the cutting of the wood for the main altar in the temple was completed for the year. So I'm going to go into a small amount of in-depth stuff on that. So another name for this holiday, for Tu B'Av, is it's like the splitting of the axe, or the cutting of the axe, or the tossing away of the axe. And the reason for that is that there were a few harvest stuff associated with this day. One was a grape harvest was associated with Tu B'Av. People going out into the vineyards and harvesting the grapes. We'll get into that in a moment. But the other one was the firewood for the temple harvest. So the firewood could, of course, only be best gathered during a dry season, right? Whenever it wasn't going to be mildewy or mildew covered and get moss and fungus all over and ruin the firewood. And of course, you wouldn't want to have wet firewood for that exact reason, right? And so what they would do is this would be the last day before the wet season would start to return, where they would. Now, this isn't the day of the start of the wet season, don't get me wrong, but this is the last day before that season would start. I mean, it would start some point later. This is the last day where they would gather firewood, where they could be assured that it would be dry. And so they would finish gathering the firewood for all of the burning of the sacrificial fires for the temple, for doing the sacrifices throughout the year. And so then at the end of this, they would break the axe, because they were done with it. They break the axe. So the breaking of the axe. And so this day also has a connection with the sacrifices, with the burnt offerings, with the sacrificial fires. So you got sacrificial fires and God's loving mercy that saves us and spares us and forgives us our sins. So the next one, King Hosea, or Hoshea, however you wish to pronounce it, of the northern kingdom, removed the sentries on the road leading to Jerusalem, allowing the 10 tribes to once again have access to the temple. So, whenever the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom split into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, from the sons of Solomon, right? Remember, they split the kingdom. They got in a fight, split the kingdoms, right? The king of the wicked king of the northern kingdom, he banned all 10 of the northern tribes from going down and worshiping at the temple in Jerusalem. Instead, he set up a temple on Mount Gerizim for them to worship at. Well, a few kings later, there was a good king, Hosea, who allowed the northern tribes to once again worship at the temple in Jerusalem if they so chose. So the next one, the nights, traditionally the ideal time for Torah study, are lengthened again after the summer solstice, permitting more study. So, and of course us as Goths will love this. It's a tradition for men to do Torah study, to do Bible study all night long. Even in some cases, when it comes to some of the holidays, all night long, all the way until the sun rises. And of course, now that the summer solstice passed and the nights are getting longer, that leaves more time to do Torah study. Something to be happy about, something to be thankful for. Because when we study the Bible, it helps us on that walk with God, right? It helps us to get to know Him better, to have that personal relationship with Him, and that prayer life, and just it's a time of great growth, So, and then the next reason that's given in the Talmud and the Mishnah is something that's mostly would be just for Jews, and Messianics and Christians would likely ignore this next one, and that is the Roman occupiers permitted burial of the victims of the massacre at Bethar during the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Miraculously, the bodies had not decomposed despite exposure to the elements for over a year. So, obviously, that is after the time of Yeshua, after the time of Jesus. So I understand if Messianics would like to ignore it. But here's the story behind that miracle, okay? So what is Rabbi Akiva, who did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah, he, while Jerusalem was under Roman occupation, he declared a certain other man to be the Messiah, and he nicknamed him Bar Kokhba, or Son of the Star. Bar Kokhba wasn't even his real name. It was a title. And he said, this guy is the Messiah, and the worldly Messiah that's going to defeat Rome. And so he appointed him as it. And actually, and it was during that time that the Jewish authorities said, no, Bar Kokhba is our guy. Anyone who thinks that Yeshua, that Jesus is the Messiah, you're not us. And that was one of the starring terrors that divided Christianity and Judaism for all these millennia. But anyway, so Bar Kokhba, he went up against Rome with all of his men, and they got cornered at this one place, the last stand. And as a vow to fight to the death, they actually all cut off their pinky fingers, which bodily mutilation, is not okay for Jews. It's totally not acceptable. They were totally breaking Torah in doing that, which is probably why they failed. Anyway, they all got slaughtered. And actually, as Romans were kind of slaughtering them, they started committing suicide, which again, that's murder, murder of self, one that you can't repent from because you're dead at that point. And so, and actually, in order to make it not be suicide, what is they drew lots and had each person kill someone else. And then, So, it's a terrible, horrible massacre, lots of self-mutilation, lots of suicide. And the Roman army didn't allow their families to go up and bury their bodies for a year. But on Tu B'Av, they were finally allowed to go and bury the bodies, and the bodies were all incorruptible. None of them had decomposed for that entire year. And so they went up, found the bodies untouched, no animals had got them, no decay had went to them, and they buried them. And so that's considered a miraculous day. Okay? So as I said, that one, a lot of Christians and Messianics would likely ignore it. But because it was listed, I thought I would say it. Who knows, in the final document I might remove it. Sometimes I remove things that would be irrelevant. But since it was in the document, even though you can't see the document, I thought I would let you know. All right? All right. So, those are various things that Tu B'Av commemorates. And, in the lead up, in the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, it's fasting, right? And it's 3 weeks of sorrow, 3 weeks of sadness, 3 weeks of not listening to music, and not getting married, and all sorts of stuff like that, not having celebrations. So in the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av is the Jewish equivalent of Lent, of the Catholic and Orthodox Lent, right? It's a month of fasting and and refraining from much merriment and longing for the coming of the Messiah, right? And, and ashes and hair shirts and all that stuff, right? So, Tu B'Av, which is just a few days after Tisha B'Av, which is the most saddest day of that, is our Tisha B'Av, this happy, joyous day about God's salvation. So at that point, really, although it's not Pesach. Pesach, of course, is the Jewish equivalent of Pesach, of Easter. I don't like using the word Easter, but just so you guys know what I'm talking about. So Pesach is the exact match to that. But Tu B'Av is kind of similar to that. It is whenever this big fasting ends with a joyous and happy day of celebration, right? So, and the fast ends a few days earlier at the end of Tisha B'Av, but still, this is a big celebration of God's saving love, right? So, that's, so you see, it's kind of like I guess it would be the equivalent of, and Protestant listeners are going to be totally lost here, but I guess it's the equivalent of Divine Mercy Sunday. So for those who don't know, anyone who might be listening who's not Catholic, the Sunday following Pesach, the Sunday following Easter, for Catholics, is called Divine Mercy Sunday. And it is a big celebratory day to celebrate God's divine mercy, right? Now, obviously, Tu B'Av, a day where we're celebrating how the people thought that they were going to die in the wilderness, and they didn't. God's divine mercy, his loving kindness, right? His saving loving kindness. So, it's sort of the equivalent of a Divine Mercy Sunday, I guess. All right. So, that being said, if I go back up in my notes, in the Mishnah, which the Mishnah is the first part of the Talmud, in the Mishnah, it describes Tu B'Av in this way. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is quoted as saying, "There were no better or happier or joyous days for the people of Israel than the 15th of Av, Tu B'Av, and Yom Kippur." Yom Kippur, of course, being the Day of Atonement, which is actually very similar to Tisha B'Av. It's a day of fasting. But it's a joyous day because you're, a day of atonement. But it's also a sad day. So, but it's also considered a happy day. It's considered amongst the happiest days, along with Tu B'Av, the day that we're talking about today. Since on these days, the daughters of Israel, or the daughters of Jerusalem, go out dressed in white and dance in the vineyards. What were they saying? Young men, consider whom you choose. And the implications to be choose to be your wife, but also it has spiritual implications as well. So I also want to mention the going out in white, which is similar to what Jews do every Friday night to bring in Shabbat. They dress up in wedding garments. They dress up in their wedding garments. And on Tu B'Av, which Tu B'Av also became a day of matchmaking as well, where unmarried people would, find the person that they're going to marry. And because people may judge people because they're dressed poorly or because they're dressed wealthily, ooh, I want to marry that rich guy or girl, or ooh, I don't want to marry them, they're poor, right? So because of that, it was tradition on Tu B'Av that people would exchange their clothing. So, with weddings, right, something borrowed, right? The borrowed garment in this case would be the wedding dresses. The girls would, and I suppose you could extend to the guys in their clothing too, right? they would switch them around. That way a poor girl could get a rich girl's dress, and the rich girl might get a poor girl's dress. That way you don't know whether the girl is rich or poor. You're not choosing her because of partiality to money. You're choosing her because of how well she follows God, because of how virtuous and how wonderful she is as a follower of God. How much of a Proverbs 31 woman she is, right? So that would be the reason of picking the girl, because the dress is irrelevant at this point. So they'd switch around the dresses, and they would go out in these borrowed dresses, and they'd go into the vineyards. Remember I mentioned the grape harvest, right? So they'd go in, and they'd stomp on the grapes as well. They'd start making wine, right? And they obviously you got wine. You got running around in fields. You got much merriment occurring, right? So, and the girls would say to the men, young men, consider whom you choose. And besides being about your wife, it's also talking about following God. Are you going to choose to follow God, or are you going to choose idolatry, right? Who do you choose? Who is your God, right? Who is your Mayawan? Who is your Elohim? The correct choice and answer there is God. And thusly, the correct choice and answer for a bride is a godly woman. Don't choose a woman because she is pretty, for beauty fades, as Proverbs 31 says, right? Beauty can fade, and the girl can have a terrible personality. The girl could even be idolatrous, right? Choose not based on appearance. Choose not because she necessarily has a wealthy dress, or because you know her already and that she's rich. Don't choose her because of the money. Don't choose her because of the good looks. Choose her because she loves God with all her heart, all her soul, and all her might. And she's a hard worker, and she's a devout woman, and she doesn't, run after men or run after other things. Choose to stay who will be your wife, and thusly choose to say who's your spouse. It's God. God's your spouse. Do not choose idolatry, right? Which again, for Christians, with the image of Christ being the bridegroom, right, and being our spouse, but even with Jews, of course, God being our groom, or else even our bride, depending on the text. The gender changes. Sometimes it depicts us as the bride and God as the groom. Other times it switches the gender around on us, which Christianity does that too, especially within Catholicism and Orthodoxy, where you're married to the church and the church is a woman. So there you go, right? So the same gender swap thing happens in Christianity too. Yeah, you can see it's about choosing God, right? Choosing Him to be the Almighty in our life. Interesting enough, the other day, on August 3rd, I was looking at who the saint of the day was. I think it may have been August 2nd. But on one of those days, I was checking who the saint of the day was, and one of the saints of the day was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. And I'm like, wait a minute. This is a Jewish rabbi, a respected Jewish rabbi from the Talmud. How can this be a Catholic saint? It's curious, right? It's a Catholic and Orthodox saint. How? So I looked it up, and here's how. So, as some of you may know, in the book of Acts, it says that Paul studied under Gamliel, and it says that whenever Peter and Paul were taken before the Sanhedrin to get stoned to death, that Rabbi Gamliel said, don't stone them to death, for, we don't know. Maybe the way they're following is right, maybe it's wrong. But if we stone them to death, then God, and if they're right, then God's wrath will be upon us. Better just to let it be, and if there's truth to what they're saying, it will come to be known. And if what they're following is a false Messiah, then it will just die away, and we don't have to worry about it. So that's what it says in the book of Acts. Then early Christian tradition, which of course Catholics and Orthodox are all about that, early Christian tradition states the reason why he said that is that he secretly believed that Yeshua, Jesus, was the Messiah, was Mashiach, was the Christ. And so because of that tradition, he is considered a saint, a Zedekim, a righteous one, by the Catholic and Orthodox churches. I thought that was just cool, because he's also considered a Zedekim, a righteous one, a saint, by Jews. Impressive, incredible. I thought that was just amazing, right? So he's the one who said in the Talmud that Tu B'Av was celebrated by the girls going into the vineyard and the guys following them and them dancing and them saying, be careful whom you choose this day, right? So I thought that was neat. And then, so the first part of the Talmud is called the Mishnah. And the second part of the Talmud is called the Gemara. And in the Gemara, it says this, the Gemara attempts to find the origin of this date as a special joyous day and offers several explanations, which I already told you. One of them is on this day, the biblical tribes of Israel were permitted to mingle with each other, namely to marry women from other tribes. This explanation is somewhat surprising, since nowhere in the Bible is there a prohibition on intermarriage, except for the one that we already mentioned, actually two that we already mentioned, which it's about to say, on prohibition on intermarriage among the 12 tribes of Israel. This Talmud source probably is alluding to the story in the book of Judges, because the book of Judges is not part of the Torah. The book of Judges is part of the Tanakh. So nowhere in the Torah does it ban intermarriage amongst the tribes, except for that little bit about the daughters of Zelophehad. It does kind of ban intermarriage there. Anyway, then it says, but maybe it's referring instead of the Torah to the Tanakh, to Judges chapter 21. After a civil war between the tribe of Benjamin and other Israelite tribes, the tribe vowed not to intermarry with men of the tribe. The tribes vowed not to intermarry with the men of the tribe of Benjamin, thusly wiping them out, taking away all their girls, and and not marrying their men. Which, as I said, that was lifted on Tu B'Av. So, of course, you got, when you're picturing these girls going through the vineyards and the men going through the vineyards and dancing and making wine and all that stuff, you got to realize, because it's the middle of the month, it's a full moon. So the night is brightly lit with the light of the full moon. Isn't it beautiful, right? So Tu B'Av, as you've already also probably figured out, is nicknamed Jewish Valentine's Day. Of course, Valentine's Day being originally called St. Valentine's Day, being a Catholic feast day for St. Valentine. And, today's not really a day to tell the story of St. Valentine, but I suppose I could. So, St. Valentine was a Catholic bishop in like the 3rd century during the reign of Diocletian. Diocletian was an evil pagan Roman emperor. And Bishop Valentine, at that time, the evil Diocletian, he had banned, outlawed Christians from being able to get married. Specifically, amongst them, you got to realize at that time, Christians, there were Jewish Christians, there were Roman Christians, there were Greek Christians, but also at that time, in the 300s in Rome, there was a large population of Goths who had come down from Gothiscanza, from Germania, and had converted to Christianity. So it was also young Gothic couples who had wanted to get married, but the Roman Emperor Diocletian had banned marriage. So the Bishop Valentine, he chose to break the law and still officiate marriages, to still solemnize marriages, and he was arrested for officiating at marriages, and while he was arrested, there was this guard who was guarding his jail cell, and this guard had a daughter who would often come to visit her father, who was guarding Valentine's cell. And the girl was blind, and Saint Valentine cured her of her blindness. And he would come, and she would come every day, and she started coming to visit Valentine as well, right? And he would teach her the Bible. He'd teach her about God, right? And because he had been solemnizing marriages, he was sentenced to death. And so one day, after he'd cured her of her blindness, she went in, and she went to his cell right after he had been executed, right after his head had been cut off. And she saw a little note left for her from him. And there's this beautiful note. At the very end of it, it said, "With love from your Valentine," because that was his name, right? His name was Valentine. And so because of that, it became a tradition amongst Christians to celebrate his feast day, the feast day of St. Valentine, by writing little cards of appreciation, little love cards to one another, and to sign them, instead of signing them with your own name, to sign them with love from your Valentine, right? So that is the origin of the Christian holiday on February 14th called Valentine's Day. So Tu B'Av, which is on the evening of the 14th and the start of the 15th of the month of Av. So look at that, 14th too, right? It's called the Jewish Valentine's Day because it's a Jewish holiday of love that happens also on the 14th/15th. Even though it's a totally different month, different time of the year. And as I just explained, totally different origin. It has and the origin has these both romantic things about fine matches and stuff, but also has this beautiful story about God's love. God's loving kindness, His chesed, His mercy, and His saving loving kindness. So that is Tu B'Av. Of course, today in modern day Israel, it's celebrated pretty much identical to Valentine's Day. It's, amongst secular Jews, it is celebrated in a very, very secular way. So now I'm just looking to see if I missed any things. Josephus referred to this feast as xylophori. Remember, he was writing in Greek, which means wood bearing, because remember the connection with the last day of bringing in the wood for the temple. Some places have Sadie Hawkins like dances, where the girls are selecting the men. The root word ahava, the word ahava, which is the Hebrew word for love, the root of it, which is aleph, hey, and then vet, also means to give. So giving love and sharing love and giving things out of love, right? See, again, you can see all these connections here. So I believe that I've covered the majority of the stuff. There's more things I could possibly say, but I think I've given you guys a pretty good overview of it. So now, before I go, I will do some readings that I picked out that I felt were good readings for this day. Before I do, I briefly want to say there are some ceremonies and rituals for celebrant that I have found over the years, but and maybe I'll get into it if I have time after the reading, but I don't think I will. But let's do some scripture reading. I think that's more important. I can always make a second video if I want to. I don't think I will, but maybe next year, right? I can always make another video about the different rituals that one could do to celebrate this day, besides the ones I've already listed. I've already listed quite a number of them. Okay, so down to the readings once I get to them. I'm scrolling through a bunch of rituals. The stuff that I'm skipping. Should be almost at the readings now. There we go, readings. So here's some readings that I selected that I felt were relevant. So the first reading, a reading from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 4, verses 1 through 14. Now therefore, Israel, hear the statutes and ordinances I am teaching you to observe, that you may live, and may enter in and take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your ancestors, is giving you. In your observance of the commandments of the Lord, your God, which I am commanding you, you shall not add to what I command you, nor subtract from it. By the way, I just want to briefly stop to say, people say we shouldn't add anything past Revelations because Revelation says, dude, Deuteronomy says that. So hey, we could always be like the Samaritans. Them, Deuteronomy is the last book of their Bible. So I just want to mention. And so if you want to take that literal, then you only have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers and Deuteronomy, because it says that in Deuteronomy as well. But that's not the point of this reading, though, but I thought I'd mention it. So do not add or subtract from it. You have seen with your own eyes what the Lord did at Baal Peor. The Lord your God destroyed from your midst everyone who followed the Baal of Peor. But you, who held fast to the Lord your God, are all alive today. See, I am teaching you the statutes and ordinances as the Lord my God has commanded me, that you may observe them in the land you are entering to possess. I want to also stop here and say, you hear a lot of people who claim to be Christians who say, well, all those laws, those were given by Moses. Those weren't but from God. Dude, did you just hear what I just read? All the ones that were commanded by God. All right? No, they were all commanded by God. All the statutes, all the ordinances, and all the commandments which the Lord has given to him, that you may observe them. Right? May observe them in the land you are entering to possess. Observe them carefully, for this is your wisdom and discernment in the sight of the peoples, who will hear of all these statutes and say, this great nation is truly a wise and discerning people. For what great nation is there that has gods or mighty ones so close to it as the Lord, so close to it as Yahuwah, our Elohim, our God, our mighty one, is to us whenever we call upon him? Or what great nation has statutes and ordinances that are as just or as righteous as this whole law, which I am saying before you today? However, be on your guard and be very careful not to forget the things your own eyes have seen, nor let them slip from your heart as long as you live. but make them known to your children and to your children's children. That day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when the Lord said to me, Assemble the people for me, that I may let them hear my words, that they may learn to honor me as long as they live in the land, and may so teach their children. You came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, while the mountain blazed to the heart of the heavens with fire and was enveloped in a dense black cloud. Then the Lord spoke to you from the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. He proclaimed to you his covenant, which he commanded you to keep, the 10 words which he wrote on two stone tablets. At that time, the Lord charged me to teach you the statutes and ordinances for you to observe in the land you are about to cross into and possess. So that's interesting in the text when you look in the Hebrew. It's not actually called 10 commandments. It's called 10 words or 10 phrases. It's interesting. And Scripture is actually a bit vague as to what's on the stone tablets. There are moments like this where it says it's 10 words, right? On both sides of 2 stone tablets. But then there's other parts where it seems like as if it's all of them. But then there's other parts where it's like, no, the rest instead are on a scroll that are in the Ark of the Covenant along with it. So, right? But you'll notice he says, at that time on Mount Sinai, the Lord charged me to teach you statutes and ordinances to you to observe in the land you're about to cross into and possess. So that would be the rest of it, all the rest of the commandments. Because it was only the first 10 that he said out loud to the people. And you heard that right here. It said, he said them out loud. They heard it. And then, they said, please, God, no, don't tell us any more, for if you speak to us, our heads will explode and we shall surely die. It will be too much for us. Instead, we'll send Moses, up to the mountain, and you can tell the rest to him, and he'll tell them to us, and we will do them. But please, do not say any more to us. So then Moshe went up the mountain, and he gave them the tablets. The Almighty gave Moshe the tablets of the 10 words, and he told him all the other commandments. And you see, and that's what's going on there. And where the tablets actually just have 10 words, or where they have all the commandments, is a bit vague, depending on the passage that you read. Right? This passage says it's just the 10 words. So well, I just want to make sure you guys know that it's actually a bit vague in our spots. So, that was the first reading. Now, as you saw, that first reading was about how the people were finally called in that reading by God to finally enter into the land. They'd been going through the wilderness of sin for 40 years, and God was like, now I'm calling you to enter into the land. But when you enter into the land, be careful not to add to or subtract from my commandments and my ordinances and my statutes, right? Just in case well, maybe there's only 10 commandments and the rest are ordinances and statutes. Okay, fine, then we're still supposed to keep all of them. We're supposed to keep the commandments and the ordinances and the statutes. So there you go. But you don't add to them and don't subtract them, and make sure to keep them and follow them, for they shall be a blessing to you and to the nations. Right? Because they're wisdom, they're true wisdom. Right. So it was God calling them, hey, none of the rest of you are going down in the wilderness. Come on, it's time for all of you to now enter into the land. So that obviously I chose for the first reading, because that is, the first event that Tu B'Av commemorates, right? It's them being told, none of the rest of you are going down in the wilderness, you're all going here into the land. That passage right there. So, the second reading is a reading from the Song of Songs, or Canticle of Canticles, Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verses 6 and 7. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. For love is stronger than death. Longing is fierce as Sheol, as the grave. Its arrows are arrows of fire, flames of the divine. Deep waters cannot quench love, nor rivers sweep it away. Were one to offer all the wealth of his house for love, he would be utterly despised. He'd be considered to be a fool, because love is the most important thing. And our lover in that passage, our spouse in that, is God, right? You don't want to trade your love of God for anything. Your love of God is worth more than all things. It's stronger than death. It's more powerful than the grave, right? Or some translations will say stronger than in hell. It's more fierce than hell. And, divine arrows, right, that inflame the heart. Arrows of the divine. Nothing can quench it. It's beautiful. For our epistolatory reading, for our reading of the letters, a reading from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13. Though I speak in human and angelic tongues, but do not have love, I become a resounding gong or a clashing cymbal. And though I may have the gift of prophecy and comprehend all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away everything I own, and if I hand my body over so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not jealous. It is not pompous. It is not inflated or prideful. It is not rude. It does not seek its own interests. It is not quick-tempered. It does not brood over injury. It does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. Though there may be prophecies, they will be brought to nothing. If though there are tongues, they will cease. If knowledge, it will be brought to nothing. For we know partially, and we prophesy partially. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I used to talk as a child, think as a child, reason or think as a child. When I became a man, I put aside childish things. At present, we see indistinctly as in a mirror, an ancient mirror, one that is made of metal that's been kind of polished. It's kind of cloudy and distorted. So at present, we see indistinctly, distorted as in a mirror. But then we shall see face to face, or that means to truly know. At present, I know partially. Then I shall know fully, as I am fully known. So faith, hope, and love remain, these three. But the greatest of these is love. I want to say there that in the Latin, the word for love there is caritas, which translates more directly into English as charity, right? And charity, the meaning of that word has kind of changed over time. The best for a more modern day English word would be caring, right? So though I may have all the wisdom in the world, though I may have faith to move mountains, though I may have prophecy, if I don't truly care, if I don't truly care about God, if I don't truly care about my fellow man, if I don't truly care about the plants and the animals and the earth, if I don't actually care about others, then all my wisdom means nothing. If I sacrifice myself, right, if I allow myself to die but I don't care about others, what good is my sacrifice? What does that sacrifice mean? If it's a selfish sacrifice, it means nothing. We need to sacrifice ourselves for others. Otherwise, our sacrifice means nothing. Right? All of our good deeds, all of our good thoughts, all of our work, if it's not done out of caring for others, truly caring for them in this agape love, karatos in Greek would be agape, this truly God-filled love for others. If that is not the root for our actions, if that's not the root for our wisdom, if that's not the root for our works, then all of our actions, all of our works, all of our wisdom means nothing if they're not rooted in truly caring about others and caring about God, of course. So, and then the final reading, the gospel reading, a reading from the gospel according to John, chapter 15, verse 9 through 17. Glory to you, O Lord. As the Father loves me, so I also love you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, by the way, this is Jesus talking here, this is Yeshua. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you this, so that my joy may be in you, and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I love you, or care about one another as I care about you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I no longer call you slaves or servants, because a slave, a servant, does not know what his master is doing. I have called you friends, because I have told you everything I have heard from my Father. It was not you who chose me, but I who chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit that will remain. And remember, fruit means works. To bear works, Christian works, works of loving kindness, works of chesed. Remember, Christian just means anointed works, right? Works that are godly works, righteous works, mitzvot, right? Commandments. Works that are fulfilling the commandments of loving, and caring for the poor, the widow, the orphan, right? Those kind of works. Of taking care of the sick and in prison, right? That's fruits that will remain. But I who chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruits that will remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. This I command you, love one another, or, care about one another. And don't just care in thoughts. Don't just say you care. It's an action. Care in your deeds. Right? Help others. Fulfill the mitzvot. Do the commandments. Because the commandments are all love. Right? As Paul says in one of his letters, to fulfill the commandments is to love, and to love is to fulfill the commandments. They're one and the same. If you want to know how to love properly, read the commandments. Those tell us how to love God properly, how to love ourselves properly, how to love our fellow man properly, how to love animals properly, and how to love the plants and the earth properly, how to treat all of them properly or rightly or right or righteous or just, right? So that's how you know how to love. Thus, to love fulfills the commandments. That's what Scripture means when it says loving, covers a great number of sins. Loving fulfills the whole of the law, right? That's because the entire law, The entire commandments. Law, remember, means teachings. Law is Torah in Hebrew, and law is a bad translation. It means teachings. God's teachings, God's instructions. Okay? So loving properly fulfills all of God's instructions, right? Well, how do we know how to love properly? Read God's instructions, right? That tells you how to love properly. And thusly, since that is all of God's instructions, all tell us how to love. As Christ said, we're to follow his commandments, just as he has followed the Father's commandments, meaning exactly as he has followed the Father's commandments. The word just there, if you look at the Greek there, it means just exactly as I have followed my Father's commandments. So no, I'm sorry to break to you, it's not, well, he did it so that we don't have to do it. He did it for us. No. This is Jesus talking in the Gospel of John. This would be in red letters if it was a red letter edition. He's telling us in the Greek that was written in to follow his commands just exactly as he followed the Father's commandments. Okay? And then at a different point, very close to this, in the Gospel, he says that him and his Father are one, and that their words are one, and that none of the words that he has spoken have been his own words, but only that which has come from his Father. He alluded to that here as well, right? I've told you everything I've heard from my Father, right? That means none of his commandments are different from that of his Father's. He's not commanding anything different from his Father. Hate to break it to you guys. It's true. Okay? Love one another as he has loved us. How did he love us? He followed all the commandments exactly, and he laid down his life for us. How are we to love one another? Love one another as he has loved us. That means by following all the commandments, because that's how we properly love each other, and how we properly not abuse each other. Right? And if need be, lay down our life for one another. Right? There you go. There's your answer. Love one another as he has loved us. Right? That's what he said. Right? So, in closing, on this Tu B'Av, this beautiful and romantic day, remember that God loves us. That God has, in his loving kindness, in his mercy, saved us, redeemed us from death. Right? And how do we repay him for that, right? Easy. We love him with all our heart, all our soul, and all of our might, and love our neighbor as ourselves. Right? There you go. So, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with your commandments, and who has given us your Torah, your teaching, your instruction, your wisdom, and your word, and your living word, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. Lord God, we pray that our eyes have been opened to seeing your word, our ears open to hearing your word, our hearts open to having your word written on our hearts, which, by the way, is also mentioned in Deuteronomy as well. It's not just a New Testament thing. That our minds may be open to receiving your word, that it may be as frontlets before our eyes. That our mouths may be open to proclaiming your word, our hands open to living out and carrying out your word, as taught to us by our good shepherd, your Son, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. And may the Lord bless all you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his countenance be turned towards you, and may he grant you peace through Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace. Amen.